without a doubt, one of the most bad vibes place I've ever been to in my life.
Why are we fascinated by the unexplained?
You want, on some level, kind of mastery over a thing, and the problem with the unexplained is that it resists that mastery. So I'm fascinated with why people sort of continue to try and explain the unexplainable and what that says about us.
What do you think our kind of fascination with ghosts, like what does that say about us?
Ghosts do different things to different people, but like broadly, I think you could say, for example, they help ameliorate our fear of death, right? You know, if ghosts are real, then death is not the end in some form or another, and that's comforting. It also helps us manage like grief, you know, spiritualism, and like the belief that you could like communicate with dead loved ones through, you know, table seances and stuff like that. I mean, that got a huge boost after the Civil War when traditional sort of burial rituals were interrupted by the war. So, you know, your son who, you know, died quote unquote before his time, you know, at Antietam or whatever, you know, 100 miles, hundreds of miles away from you. His body is never recovered. You can't give him a proper burial. You didn't get a chance to say goodbye. He's young. So all of these sort of normal things are interrupted. And what you do instead is you have a seance, and you reach out to him and he tells you, you know, Mom and Dad, I'm in Summerland. I'm doing fine. I'm happy. I love you. Goodbye. And so, you know, so ghosts kind of help deal with grief. They help deal with our fear of death. I think they also kind of explain, I mean, for me on like a fundamental level, they help explain weird architecture. Like we've all been in just kind of buildings that just felt weird or off, you know, and that is just kind of a thing that's I tried to sort of put into words, but I find like a thing you come back to a lot of times.
Does the United States seem to in any way think about mysterious things differently than other places?
But a lot of these ghost stories, and particularly the more popular ones, a lot of them become ways for us to deal with our own kind of traumatic, unprocessed history that, you know, does not get sort of mentioned in the light of day and takes the form of ghost stories. And in the United States, like one of the most famous and obvious example is the stereotype of the haunted Indian burial ground, right? This whole idea that shows up in horror movies over and over again, you know, and it's all predicated on the idea that, you know, Anglo-Americans on some level are aware of the fact that, you know, the land that they built their houses on is not theirs. And so that comes out in these stories of haunted Indian burial grounds, but it's not necessarily a direct sort of confrontation or acknowledgement of the Native American genocide so much as it is a kind of way of like recognizing it while setting it aside, you know, so that it's a kind of cool spook story, but there's no direct head-on confrontation with history and trauma and our sort of role and responsibility of it. And so it just sort of gets told as a ghost story instead.
Does it say something broadly about the person if they really believe in these things?
People who believe in ghosts usually, in my experience, they fall into one of two categories. Either they had an experience that they just can't explain, or they really want to have had an experience that they just can't explain. And those are both kind of different, you know, psychological profiles, but those seem to be the kind of two types that I talk to the most.
Have we kind of always been obsessed with them?
You know, we have recorded ghost stories going back to Pliny the Younger, and, you know, renting a house and finding a ghost, and then, you know, the ghost like led him to this spot in the backyard, and he dug it up and found these bones, and you know, didn't know who they were, but gave them a proper burial, and the ghost went away. That's ancient Greek. Like, we've always had these stories of ghosts, yeah, and they're pretty universal across culture.
Is there a similar kind of metaphor, so to speak, going on with the monsters, the cryptids that we believe in?
Ghosts live in houses. They live in urban areas. They live in, you know, hotels. I mean, yeah, they live in cemeteries too, but they are they are coterminous with human habitation and human settlement in some form. The thing about cryptids is they always live kind of on the edge of civilization. So they live, in the redwood forest north of San Francisco. They're close, but they're not in civilization. Or Loch Ness, or Mount Everest where the Yeti lives. So they are less about human civilization and more about the edge of human civilization. They are, if you think of like the old medieval maps of the world, where you would have, Jerusalem and Europe in the center of the world, and then as you got further and further out, you would get, depictions of dragons and monsters, and this idea that monsters demarcate the edge of the known world. And those maps, literally, monsters meant you'd reach the end of the world. But I think we keep that myth alive when we're looking for Bigfoot or whatever. And I think there is this, it's more of this kind of longing that people have for belief that there are still kind of unspoiled, wildernesses that they can go out and sort of, reconnect with a kind of more primal landscape. I think of the opening of Heart of Darkness, where the narrator talks about, at that time there were still white spaces on the map, and that that's, people want that. People want to believe that there's some unspoiled white space on the map where they can still go out and adventure.
Is that the same or similar to why we kind of focus on alien abductions?
Aliens and UFOs also mark the edge of the known universe. I think that what's really fascinating to me is that, you either believe in the Loch Ness Monster or you don't. But if you believe in the Loch Ness Monster, you think that it's just a creature who is elusive, right? Like he's just, underwater most of the time, or she's under the water, she's Nessie. Whereas if you believe in UFOs, you automatically, I don't think there's any other way around it. You believe that there's a government conspiracy. There's no way to believe in UFOs and also not think that somehow the government is hiding at least something. And I think that's a really fascinating distinction between these two kinds of beliefs, that one of them requires conspiracy theories in a way that cryptids or ghosts really don't.
Do you find though, which one is the cart and which one is the horse? Do they believe in the UFO and then kind of go into the conspiracies, or do they go into the conspiracies and then the UFO comes about?
I mean, historically, no. And historically, it was the UFOs and then the conspiracies, because in the late 40s, when we first started really getting, UFO flaps, Kenneth Arnold's sighting over Mount Rainier, that was national news. And then, you started hearing more and more of these things. I mean, everybody just assumed it was a matter of time. It was everybody's oh, we're seeing them in the skies every day. It's just going to be a matter of time before they land. And it was, it's a little bit like the rapture, right? It's a little bit like Jesus is coming any day now, right? All the signs are there, it's imminent. And then when Jesus doesn't come, then you have to make up a story for why Jesus didn't come, right? You have to say oh, well, we weren't pure enough in our hearts, or there's too much wickedness in the world, or, we made the calculations wrong. So the longer this imminent expected thing goes on, the more you need to come up with a story to explain why it didn't happen. And with UFOs, that just became the government. At first it was just, we were going to see this thing. It was going to happen immediately, but it never did. They never landed. They never came out and said, we come in peace. And so if you're going to cling to that belief, you have to have an explanation for why they've been seen in the skies now for over, 75 years. And yet, we don't have definitive proof. Well, the only thing you can come up with is, the government's keeping it from us.
Are you ready for some harder/listener submitted questions?
Yeah, sure.
What would you consider to be the most haunted places in America?
I mean, what do we mean by haunted is the first question, like ghosts per square foot, objective scariness of said ghosts, most traumatic, unsolved murders in the same house. Okay, so of the places I've been, so it's a hard question to just understand the parameters. But what I will say,
I would assume they probably mean the scariest.
Yeah, what I can say is one of the places I went to was the Moundsville Penitentiary in Moundsville, West Virginia, which was an active prison from like the mid 19th century until the 1990s. And was it haunted? I don't know, but without a doubt, one of the most bad vibes place I've ever been to in my life. Just taking a tour there, and some of that is just because it was built that way. It was built the sort of belief of kind of prison philosophy at the time was part of your sentence, part of the it wasn't just doing time. It was that you would be doing time in a place that was meant to invoke melancholy, so that you would be like you would be made to sort of emotionally suffer as part of your prison sentence. And so prisons were built, and if you've been to the Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, it's of that same era and that same model. Prisons were built to just make you feel bad physically. And so this place just had low ceilings, it had narrow walls, it was this big stone fortress, and it just felt bad to be there. And then you see these cells that were designed for two people, had two bunks on the wall, but they had by the end of the prison's run in the 90s, they had 4 prisoners to a cell. So they would have one guy sleeping under the lower bunk on the floor, and then another guy on a mattress in the middle of the room. And you just got the sense of just like this was a place built to generate bad vibes, and then it just got worse and worse over time. And that place just felt bad to be in. And I think you could say, okay, that's Ghosts, and certainly a lot of awful things happened there. A lot of people were murdered. A lot of terrible people who were terrible criminals did time there. There was a corner that was used for executions. But that was definitely one of the places that I just felt awful being there and kind of couldn't wait to get out.
Whichever way you kind of believe, whether these things are real or not really real. Yeah. Was there a place that made you feel the other way? Like, oh, I don't believe this, or I do believe this, but this place, that kind of made me feel differently.
Well, this is also in Ghostland, the one place that I came closest to seeing, for whatever it's worth, sort of definitive evidence, was I got hired by Maxim magazine to go write a feature about the owner of the brothel, the Mustang Ranch. And so I spent 3 days hanging out in the Mustang Ranch with the women who work there. And the feature never came out. They killed the feature. But while I was hanging out and I was just talking to Madam, she mentioned casually that the Mustang Ranch was haunted. And so, of course, I'm like, tell me more, and she was describing the various things that she saw, or that people claim to see, and there was one wing that people always saw ghosts in, and the parking lot is haunted because some guy got shot there, and all this stuff. And the other thing, while I was there, was because I was trying to understand what it's like working in a brothel, and I started to see, just for the women who work there, and I don't think this is that surprising, but just how psychologically emotionally difficult that job is. To set aside the physical aspect, it's just, I said at one point, I was like, it sounds like what you guys do is sort of like 90% emotional labor. And the women all said, no, it's 100% emotional labor. So it's this very emotionally taxing job. And when I was talking to Madam about the ghost, she said, well, a lot of times it's the girls who aren't really working out, who are really struggling, having a hard time with this job, that see the ghosts. And so I said to her, I was like, oh, well, that kind of makes sense. Maybe this is it's just a way of you're under psychological pressure, and this kind of, it manifests itself, the stress and the anxiety manifests itself in seeing ghosts. And maybe it's just a psychological thing. And she was like, no, I see them too. But then she grabbed this woman who was walking by, and she's like, hey, go get your camera, or go get your phone and show them the videos. So she comes back with this video of this woman. So this is outside of Reno, and this woman lives in Los Angeles, and she comes up for a week or two at a time to work, and then goes back to LA. And she has a boyfriend, and so she sends her boyfriend videos while she's up there. And so she was recording this video for her boyfriend, and it's just her in lingerie, just sort of dancing in front of the camera. And there's this like glowing orb, like this little ball of light that obviously she can't see, but is visible in the video. And it's just sort of like fluttering around her head, and she pays no notice of it. And then, like 30 or 40 seconds into the video, it goes off screen. It flies off screen. And then a couple seconds later, it like flies rushing back on screen. And the moment it hits her temple, she falls over in the video. It's really funny. And she, of course, like, she's just like, I don't know. At the time, I just thought I had lost my balance. And it wasn't until I looked at the video that I saw this orb. But she, you know, and I was like, wow, that's certainly a video I just watched. Yeah, so.
Yeah, that's one of those that are like, well, how do you explain that one?
Again, like, that's why I think, like, getting into the question of, like, you know, are ghosts real is sort of just less interesting, because if you believe in ghosts, there's nothing anybody can say that will convince you otherwise. Whereas if you are a skeptic, there's no proof anybody can offer that will make you a believer. And like, it's, you know, it's like religion. It's like fundamentally just a thing you can't, it just feels really personal. And so I just kind of try and size up that question altogether.
Kind of getting into your newest book, this one deals with that. How would you say that secret societies have affected us? Like, how have they changed America?
I did this book on ghosts, and then I did this book on UFOs and Bigfoot. And as I mentioned, as I moved from the kind of more politically neutral questions like ghosts and Bigfoot into UFOs, and I was like, oh, there's this gets straight into conspiracy theories. And I started out really broadly when I started researching that book. I just sort of said, okay, I'm going to look at any secret society, real or imagined, that is, you know, not visible and above board, but which has, you know, attempted or is accused of attempting to subvert American democracy or American law in some way. And, you know, and I was thinking very much about the Freemasons and the Illuminati and, you know, the anti-Semitism that runs through this country. But I found quickly through that lens some things that fit that criteria that I wasn't expecting, were like the Underground Railroad and the CIA in the 1960s. You know, these were like, you know, secret groups that were intentionally violating American laws for various reasons. And so the what I found when I started to really add all these things up is that we as a democratic society fundamentally believe in democracy, but don't believe it works very well. And secret societies, and that's happening right now too, secret societies are a really good way for you to convince yourself that your belief system is right, and the only reason that it's not popular is because the will of the people has been subverted in some way. So, you know, everything from, you know, the Jews control the media, or the Catholics are buying the vote, or, you know, the Illuminati are in charge of everything. Like, these are all ways of convincing yourself that what you see right before your eyes isn't actually true. And they get invoked frequently throughout American history. I think when, you know, for the most part, we're sort of raised to think that there's the Salem witch trials of 1692 and the McCarthy hearings of the 1950s. Those were the two moments in which this kind of paranoia of invisible groups kind of boiled over and became a kind of hysteria. But in fact, these things happen all the time. You know, I mean, I grew up in the 80s with the Satanic Panic and the idea that Satanists were running, you know, daycares and involving your children in like awful satanic rituals. And like, you know, these were daycares that supposedly these rituals were having in basements, and the daycares didn't have basements. There was no basement. It was built in California. California homes don't have basements. So, but it didn't matter, right? Because people were so spun up about this idea of these hidden Satanists, and that these hidden Satanists were like a catch-all explanation for everything that was going wrong in the 80s. You know, and so, and that just happens over and over again, and we're dealing with it now. So, you know, the answer, like, how do secret societies like affect us? They are repeatedly, in my opinion, used to demonize and bash certain segments of the population, usually, but not always by the right attacking the left, to stifle social progress and social change.
Do you think our monsters will change?
Yeah. I mean, sure. We always got to have new monsters. I mean, like, you know, like when I was looking at cryptids, right? I mean, I think of the canonical cryptids that I grew up with in like the 70s and 80s with like, Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and, it's just like the Yeti and like maybe the Chupacabra. He's kind of a newcomer, but
It's on
he
the
became popular
fringe.
pretty fast. Yeah. But now, like what people are like, I met these guys who are like talking about Dogman, and Dogman's a big cryptid guy, right? But like Dogman is like, unlike Bigfoot, who is like supposedly just like a missing link. We just haven't taxonomized him yet. Dogman is like straight up supernatural. Dogman is like can talk. There's no sense of like how Dogman evolved, but Dogman, these guys were like, yeah, we were in the woods and we saw Dogman fighting Bigfoot, and Bigfoot was trying to save us from Dogman. And I'm like, all right, you guys are kind of gilding the lily. Like, it's cool and creepy when you say you just saw a pair of red eyes. That's cool and creepy. But when you're describing a full on like Mortal Kombat action sequence, less compelling, less convincing to me. But yeah, these things change all the time, and and new generations tend to have new kind of monsters to suit the need.
Do you think that will happen with the things that we think are ghosts or hauntings? Like, will it change in a certain way? Or like, no, it'll always kind of be the same?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, like when you think of like a haunted house, I'm guessing, I mean, 9 people out of 10 are going to think of a Victorian.
Yeah, I'm going to think of an old house.
So one of the things I came to the conclusion of is like part of the reason a building comes to be haunted is because it outlives its moment, right? Like the Victorian that doesn't get torn down and just kind of persists because nobody needs to tear it down, but that's how it gets haunted. Or the Kirkbride asylums, which is a kind of asylum built in the 19th century that were very popular, and most cities had one, are these massive buildings, and they're physically difficult to demolish. So even as the field of psychiatry changed and people decided, well, this is not how we want to institutionalize people anymore in this context, we're going to build new kind of more modern hospitals for people with mental health issues. You still have these buildings, right? You still have, and they're still stuck there. And so I think that a haunted building is one in many ways that has outlived its time, and that's going to change with time. I mean, like, there are buildings that we're building now that seem sort of on the, cutting edge of architecture and style that will probably be around in 100 years when, tastes and functionality have moved on, but will still be sitting there, and people probably like want to think of them as haunted.
I've never really thought about hauntings being kind of all about architecture.
It's so much of our lives is just spent in buildings, right? And over the years they're kind of adapted for kind of certain use habits, right? So one of the most basic things when I first started looking at like weird houses and sort of thinking about why these houses made me like uncomfortable is like, oh man, this house has like a bathroom off the kitchen. That's not where you put bathrooms. That's just weird. Like you put the bathroom down the hall. You don't put the bathroom in the middle of the kitchen. And so it was like stuff like that where I was like, well, there's nothing physically wrong with that. I mean, it's fine, but it's weird and it doesn't feel right. And I just started to notice that the houses that I was most predisposed to think of as haunted were often houses that were built or structured or arranged in such a way that just felt like non-standard and like off, and I think that, and when you look at famously haunted houses or famously haunted hotels, you often find some kind of architectural quirk that I think plays into, that building's reputation.
Growing up, my house had a bathroom in the kitchen. Right, I could picture it perfectly. Green and white tile floor with a bathroom in the kitchen.
Yeah, amazing.
That's pretty much all the questions I have. Is there anything that you think that we missed? What's kind of coming up next for you? Where can people find the books? That kind of stuff.
Books are available wherever, and get them on whatever bookstore or site that you like. Up next, mostly what I'm doing right now is I do a series for Atlas Obscura called Monster of the Month, where every month I like delve into another another story. So, the Fresno Nightcrawler or, the Chupacabra or something like that. Those are a lot of fun. People can check those out through Alice Obscura. And I also have a column with them called Eerie Feeling, which is more about like weird places and like why is this place weird and what's the story behind that. So yeah, but I'm around and yeah, people feel free to say hi and share a story.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Profoundly Pointless. From society and sexuality to science and sports, every week we explore something new from a side of life you may never have heard of. Subscribe if you're interested. There's a playlist, I think, on the right if you want to see more videos like this. Someday I'm going to finish painting that wall, and just for the record, I'm not orange. I just don't know how to fix this. But thanks for checking out the show. Would love to hear from you. Okay, I should stop. Stop. There it is.